The Whitmore farm dispersal sale ran through the whole of a Tuesday in September, and by the time the auctioneer reached the last lot of the afternoon, most of the serious buyers had already loaded their wagons and gone. The last lot was 66 turkeys. The sale notice had described them with the specific brevity of a document that does not intend to sell what it is describing. Mixed flock valgus leg deformity present in majority of birds, growth below standard weight, unsuitable for premium market, sold as lot, no separation. The birds had come from a breeding line that had thrown the deformity across 2 consecutive seasons, producing a flock whose legs bent outward at the joint in a way that reduced their walking efficiency and their growth rate, and their commercial appeal to precisely zero in a settlement where Thanksgiving was 8 weeks away, and buyers wanted birds that would impress on the table. Crooked-legged turkeys did not impress on the table. They impressed nobody anywhere, which was why 66 of them were standing in a pen at the end of a dispersal sale in September, with the auctioneer looking at the small remaining crowd and adjusting his expectations accordingly. Edith Callow raised her hand. She was 63 years old, a woman whose age the settlement read as a conclusion, and whose manner suggested she found this reading mildly amusing. She had operated the Callow smallholding on the eastern edge of the Dunmore settlement for 11 years, since her husband's death had left her the property and the choice of what to do with it. And she had spent those 11 years making choices that the settlement occasionally understood in retrospect and rarely understood at the time. She paid $7.80 for 66 crooked-legged turkeys that nobody else had bid on. She arranged for them to be walked to her property that afternoon. The men who watched her do this said what men say. She had been hearing variations of what men say for 11 years and had developed, across those 11 years, a quality of attention to such commentary that was indistinguishable from not hearing it at all. What she had heard, the thing that had caused her to attend the Whitmore sale specifically rather than the larger sale at the county seat the following week, was something her father had told her across a kitchen table in Ohio when she was 12 years old, during the winter when he had kept a small flock of malformed chickens that the neighbors had written off, and that had produced, by spring, the finest eating birds of any on their road. Her father had kept chickens with leg problems for the same reason that a person keeps anything that cannot move efficiently. Because an animal that cannot move efficiently does not move. An animal that does not move does not spend its energy on movement. An animal that does not spend its energy on movement redirects that energy into the one system that was still operating at full capacity. In a turkey, that system was the breast. A crooked-legged turkey that spent its days standing in a well-managed yard rather than ranging across a pasture produced, in her father's experience and in the experience of his father before him, a depth and density of breast meat that the commercially bred ranging birds simply did not achieve. Not because of any quality in the deformity itself. The deformity was simply the mechanism that kept the bird still. The stillness was the point. She had seen it once when she was 12. She had not forgotten it. She drove home with 66 crooked-legged turkeys, and the specific composure of a woman who has been waiting 11 years for the right occasion to apply something she has known for 50. She knew this the way a woman knows something she cannot yet prove, that the Dunmore settlement in 8 weeks was going to want turkeys for Thanksgiving, and that the turkeys it was going to want were not going to be the ones it had expected to find. What she lacked was 8 weeks. They began the following morning. She spent the first week building the management system the birds required. The yard enclosures she added were not large. Large was not the point and would in fact have defeated the point. She built them small enough to discourage the ranging behavior that would have directed the bird's energy away from growth and toward movement, large enough to allow the natural social organization of the flock to establish itself without the stress that overcrowding produces, and positioned to capture the afternoon sun that would keep the yard dry and warm through the October weeks ahead. She divided the 66 birds into 3 groups. Not by size and not by the severity of the deformity. Those would have been the categories of a person managing for uniformity. She divided by temperament, separating the birds that showed the agitated ranging behavior that some of them displayed even with compromised legs from the birds that stood and rested with the particular calm of animals that have accepted their circumstances. The calm birds she kept in the smaller enclosures. The agitated ones she allowed a slightly larger range until their behavior settled, which it did across the first 2 weeks as the management routine established itself. She adjusted the feed. The standard Dunmore settlement turkey feeding practice was corn supplemented with whatever the birds could forage. Edith had been reading about feeding for table quality in the agricultural letters she subscribed to through the county extension office, and what those letters consistently described, across accounts from turkey operations in Virginia and Pennsylvania, and the older farming country of the East, was that the birds producing the finest table quality were being finished on a mix that included not only corn but a proportion of dairy whey, when available, and of the mast, the acorns and wild nuts, that the forest margins produced in September and October. She had dairy whey. The Garner family 2 properties overproduced more than their butter operation needed and had been pouring the surplus into their drainage ditch since June, a fact that Edith had noted with the specific attention of a woman who notices things that other people's operations are discarding. She made an arrangement with the Garners. She had access to the oak ridge above the east pasture, where the acorn drop was running heavy that autumn. She collected 2 bushels per week through October, which was the available surplus above what the deer and the ground squirrels were taking, and which required a degree of early morning effort that the settlement, if it had known about it, would have found eccentric in a 63-year-old woman, and which Edith found no more eccentric than any other task that produced a necessary result. She kept a ledger. Each bird's weekly weight estimate recorded, not to the precise ounce. Because 66 birds do not submit to precise individual weighing with equanimity, but the representative sample of 6 birds from each group, weighed with the hand scale she kept on the feed room shelf, producing a group average that she tracked against the expected weight development of the variety, and against the growth rate she had observed in her father's flock 50 years before. By the end of October, the numbers were telling her something she had hoped they would say. The breast development was running ahead of the weight curve. Not dramatically, not in the way of an animal that has been pushed. There was nothing pushed about what she was doing, nothing that required a bird to perform beyond what its natural systems wanted to produce. She was simply removing the obstacles between the bird and its own development, and providing the inputs that development required, and the bird was doing what birds do when those things are true. It was producing. She allowed herself 1 entry in the ledger on the last evening of October that was not a weight figure. On trajectory, proceed. She was not ready. But the birds were developing correctly, the feed system was working, and there were 4 weeks remaining before Thanksgiving. That was enough. She processed 1 bird in the first week of November. Not for sale, not for show, for the specific purpose of a person who has been running an experiment and has arrived at the point where the experiment can be assessed directly rather than through the proxy of weight records and behavioral observation. She brought the bird into the kitchen and processed it with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times. Quickly, cleanly, with the particular respect that a person gives to an animal whose life has been directed toward a purpose and which has fulfilled that purpose. What she found when she examined the carcass confirmed what the ledger had been suggesting. The breast meat was exceptional, not in a way that required expertise to identify, exceptional in the immediate, tangible way of a quality that a person encounters and recognizes without needing to be told what they are looking at. The depth of the breast, the color of the meat, the specific density that separates a bird grown correctly from a bird grown for speed. All of it present. All of it the result of 8 weeks of management that had asked nothing of the bird except to be still, and to eat what she gave it, and to grow in the direction its own nature wanted to grow. She roasted it on the following Sunday. A neighbor named Willa Marsh, who had the property adjacent to Edith's east fence, and who stopped by on Sunday afternoons with the regularity of a person whose routine has come to include the stop without either party needing to arrange it, arrived at the kitchen door at the usual hour. Edith gave her a plate. Willa Marsh ate the turkey with the quality of attention of a person eating something that is requiring more of their attention than food ordinarily requires. She set the fork down after a moment. She asked what turkey that was. Edith told her, one of the Whitmore birds, the crooked-legged ones from the September sale. Willa looked at her plate. She asked how many Edith had. 66, Edith said, 65 now. Willa asked if she intended to sell them before Thanksgiving. Edith said she had been considering the question. Word was still moving before Willa Marsh reached her own kitchen. She could feel it the way a person feels weather before the clouds arrive. By the second week of November, 9 families had asked whether there were birds available for Thanksgiving. This was more than she had anticipated and precisely what the ledger had made possible to manage. Because a woman who has kept a weekly weight record across 8 weeks and knows her production with the specificity that record-keeping produces, is a woman who can answer the question of availability with accuracy rather than optimism. She had 65 birds. She required 6 for her own household, and for the 3 households she intended to supply as a matter of settled prior commitment. Willa Marsh, the Garner family whose way had made the feed program possible, and the Hensley family at the end of the East Road, whose oldest son had helped her move the enclosure materials in September without being asked, and without mentioning it afterward. 59 birds remained available. She set a price. The price was higher than the standard Dunmore settlement turkey price, which was the price of a bird that had ranged freely and grown at the pace that free-ranging birds grow, and that produced a table presentation adequate to the occasion rather than exceptional. She set it higher not because the settlement's difficulty in finding birds this season would have supported a higher price. She was aware that it would have, and she had no interest in that calculation, but because the birds were genuinely different from the standard bird and deserved to be priced as what they were rather than as what they resembled. She told each family that came to the gate the same thing, the price, what it represented, and that the bird would speak for itself at the table. Every family that came paid it. The waiting list reached 31 names by the 3rd week of November. She did not have 31 birds available at that point, and said so with the directness of a woman who had been direct her entire life, and saw no reason to begin managing expectations otherwise at 63. She told the families on the lower end of the list that she could not supply them this year, that she intended to keep breeding stock from the best of the current flock through the winter, and that the following Thanksgiving she would have a larger operation from which she could supply them if they wished to be remembered. Every family on the list said they wished to be remembered. She noted them in the ledger, not in a separate list, but in the same ledger where she had kept the weight records, because the people who wanted the product were connected to the product in the specific way that a ledger connects all the things that belong together. What she lacked was more birds and more time. What she had was 59 confirmed sales, a breeding plan, and the particular satisfaction of a 63-year-old woman who has spent 50 years knowing something and 8 weeks proving it. That was, in the accounting of a settlement that was about to discover what it had been missing at its Thanksgiving tables, more than enough. Thanksgiving week arrived, and the Dunmore settlement collected its birds. Not all at once. She had arranged collection across the 3 days preceding the holiday, spacing it so that each family received their bird in condition rather than in the crush of a single morning's queue, and so that she could process with the attention to quality that the work required rather than the speed that a single-day operation would have demanded. Each bird went out with the specific presentation of something Edith had developed across 8 years of frontier table keeping, dressed, trussed, ready for the oven, accompanied by a small paper of instructions for the roasting that she had written out in her careful hand, and that addressed the one variable she could not control once the bird left her farm, which was what the family would do with it when they got it home. She had been roasting turkeys for 40 years. The instructions were exact. The accounts that came back to her in the days following Thanksgiving, through Willa Marsh, through the Garner family, through the particular velocity of a small settlement's information about what happened at whose table on a major occasion, were consistent in the way that accounts are consistent when they are describing the same experience rather than constructing a narrative. The birds were unlike anything the families had had before. Not unlike in an unfamiliar way. Unlike in the specific way of something that is so clearly right that its rightness makes what came before seem like a reasonable but inferior approximation. The breast meat, the depth of it, the flavor that 8 weeks of stillness and whey and October acorns and careful management had produced from a flock of crooked-legged turkeys that the Whitmore dispersal sale had been unable to move at any price. A man named Harlan Cross, who ran the largest cattle operation in the Dunmore Valley and who had not been among the families that came to Edith's gate in November. His wife had obtained a bird from the county seat and had considered the matter adequately settled, came to the Callow small holding on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. He came with his hat in his hand, and a directness that Edith recognized as the directness of a man who has eaten something at a neighbor's table and cannot find a reason not to address it. He said he had been at the Garner table for Thanksgiving. She said she was glad to hear it. He said he would like to reserve 2 birds for the following year. She said she would note him in the ledger. He asked how she had known what the crooked-legged birds would produce. She told him. Her father, who had learned it from his father, who had learned it from the simple observation available to anyone willing to keep an animal that moved less and watch what happened to it. He looked at the 66 crooked-legged turkeys wandering the November yard, the 12 she had kept back as breeding stock, moving in the particular unhurried way of birds that have never been asked to hurry, and he nodded in the way of a man receiving an explanation that makes the thing seem obvious in retrospect. She noticed most things. She had noticed, in a September dispersal sale, 66 birds that the settlement had written off, and that her father's kitchen table 50 years ago had told her were not what they appeared to be. She had noticed the Garner way going into the drainage ditch, and had understood its application before she mentioned it to anyone. She had noticed, in the weight records she kept through October, the breast development running ahead of the curve, and had noted it without celebration because celebration was for outcomes, and the outcome was not yet an outcome. She had not been lucky. The birds had been in that pen at the end of the Whitmore sale, waiting for the person who knew what they were. She had been that person. She was, for the first time in the 11 years since she had taken the Callow small holding and begun the slow work of making it produce what she could see it was capable of producing, exactly where she had meant to be. Not finished, the breeding stock needed winter management, and the following year's flock needed to be planned, and the waiting list of 31 names needed to be supplied from a production that did not yet exist at the required scale, but placed correctly, on the right farm, with the right knowledge, making the right thing from what a September auction had offered at $7.80 when nobody else had seen the reason to bid. Word was still moving through the Dunmore settlement. It had not stopped since the Saturday after Thanksgiving. And on the Callow small holding, In the November light that makes farmyards look like the places they have always been capable of becoming, 12 crooked-legged turkeys moved through the yard in the unhurried way of animals that have been given exactly what they require. They were already becoming next year's table.